I want to say hello to everybody out there in the audience. My name is Abby Bauer, and I'm an associate editor for Horde's Dairyman magazine. We know that many of you around the world are dealing with stressful situations in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today for this webinar. I know whether you're working on a dairy farm or working in the industry supporting dairy farmers, what you do is so very essential, and we appreciate the efforts that you are doing to still get your job done and help feed the people in your country and around the world, while hopefully remaining safe and healthy yourself and for those around you. So again, we thank you for all the efforts that you're putting out to continue to carry on our dairy farms and our dairy industry through this very uncertain time in our world. The presentation we have today, I know it will be a great one, and the information that you can put into place on your dairy farms or with the dairies you work with. And we will be talking about feed additives with a focus on B vitamins. And as always, I'd like to thank our production crew of Jim Baltz and Patty Hutjens, who make each webinar run as smoothly as possible. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter, Dr. Mike Hutjens. Mike grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin and attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison to further his education. Since 1979, he's been an extension dairy specialist in the Animal Sciences Department at the University of Illinois. Mike is extremely active in the dairy industry, particularly in the area of feeding and nutrition. He gives presentations and teaches dairy farmers all around the world. And I know many of you have heard him speak before or have met him in person. Our editorial team at Horde's Dairyman is very pleased to be able to work with Mike on articles, books, and these webinars that we've been doing for the last 9 years. So thank you, Mike, for all your contributions to Horde's Dairyman and the dairy industry as a whole. I do want to give a shout out here to our sponsor for this webinar, and that is ProVimi, an animal nutrition company. So we thank them very much for their sponsorship of this webinar and appreciate the support they provide to us. Once again, if you're listening to this webinar live, you have access to the PDFs of the slides that can be printed, and that handout can be found in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. Also, if you have any questions for Dr. Hutjens, please type them into the questions section that you can also find in the GoToWebinar control panel. We will answer them later on in the presentation. So Mike, welcome to the webinar, and thank you for preparing this great presentation for all of us online today.
Well, Abby, thank you very much. And we will be off and running here. I think it's a fun program, and hopefully we can challenge your thought process for those of you that are on farms or consult with farmers, veterinarians, and companies as well. Our program will be a quick overview on feed additive status and selection. And as Abby pointed out, we're going to spend most of the time on the role of B vitamins in dairy cattle rations, and actually some recommendations that you may want to think about. And we're off and running. So here's some concepts on feed additives in general that I hear in the field. The first one, Abby, is going to be really a tough one because margins are obviously getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and people just pull them out. They said, well, I have to buy, and even though I'm spending only 10 or 15 or 20 cents a cow a day, I'm going to take them out of the rations. Another concept is 10 cents. If it's less than 10 cents, I might try an additive. If it's over 10 cents, boy, I'm hesitant because that really racks up some money pretty quickly. And of course, hopefully additives are not used to cover up poor management, but rather enhance profit opportunities on dairy farms. Horde's Dairyman does a market survey every year. This is the most recent one. They survey their readers, a select population of readers. They receive the magazine. And I think this is kind of interesting. Kind of says, well, what's going on in the U.S.? I'm sure we have people that are in Colombia and Turkey and Holland on as well. Your numbers may look quite a bit different, but here's what's going on in the U.S. And I want to call attention to the mycotoxin binders. Nearly 25% of those dairy farmers are feeding a mycotoxin binders. More about that in just a few minutes here. And you can look at the rest of those as well. I would comment the Rumen number is too low. Checking with companies that produce this, a product, that they think that number is closer to 45 or 50%, which brings another interesting message to mind. That is sometimes we're not quite sure exactly what feed additives we're adding because my consultant, my nutritionist, my feed company put them in. Here's a fun slide that comes from VitaPlus, and I show it to say that if you're really good on feed additives, you know exactly what everyone will do for you. But you can see here on the screen that there's 8 major areas that you and I would look at feed additives: energy balance, calcium balance in the brown, the blue, immune function. And that's going to be the new kid on the block. That's going to get a lot of interest here in the future. Rumen enhancers. That's where most of my traditional feed additives sit: reproduction, foot health, green, protein efficiency, and of course, microtoxin binders on the bottom right corner. Some of those products I understand, I realize are brand names of companies, but that's how the slide came. And so we're just going to leave it the way VitaPlus sent it to me. My thanks to those folks as well. Jim, you did a nice job on this. It says if you're going to look at feed additives, you've all heard about the 4 R's, and I'm not going to walk you through that because that's kind of historical, but I think that's important. If you're going to buy a product X, Y, and Z, you have to ask, how does it work? What can I expect to pay and what return can I get? What does the research say? And then finally, what do I look at on my farms to see, in fact, if that research is having impact out there on the farm? Now, as Abby pointed out already, that we do get questions from the field, and this is one of them. And this one comes from Canada, and he wants to know what is the economics of feeding B vitamins and what's return on investment. And I will put this one up. We'll address the bottom one a bit later in the presentation, but basically here we go. And I like this slide because we look at feed additives, and there's 2 B vitamins here, biotin and rumen-protected choline. And one of my colleagues said last year at a meeting when markets were tight that last year, and again tight again, show me the money. In other words, don't show me everything, but tell me, can I make money? And so this is what we call a benefit to cost ratio. And so you can glam down through this and you can see that all these are very favorable. I like a number greater than 2 to 1. To my listeners, I have not included the cost of improved dry matter intake because dry matter costs money. And if I do that in buffers, that drops that down to about 6 to 1 to 5 to 1. Protected choline, it comes down 2 to 1. So in some cases, you improve dry matter intake, and dry matter, at least in the Midwest now, is around 11 cents a pound, according to one of our farm magazines that track that information as well. I think when we ask about research, I like the two ones. I'm going to demonstrate each of those very quickly. Jim, it will put them together nicely. One we call the type 1, type 2 air. Many companies have this, not only in feed additives, but also on amino acids, also on fat products and other applications as well. And then, of course, the other one is the meta-analysis, and you'll see several of those pop up today in the vitamin B area as well. And so a type 1, type 2 air is a kind of an interesting checkerboard slide here. Basically, one of 4 things are going to happen when, in this case, when you feed bicarb. The first one is I fed bicarb, and I did make money doing it. That's very profitable. I decided not to feed bicarb, and that was also not correct condition, because if your cows not respond properly, we can comment on that. And the Q&A will come back. We had a question on that came in from Patty on that a bit later as well. Now let's take a look at type 1 air. Type 1 air simply says I fed bicarb and my cows in Illinois couldn't figure it out. So I made no money, and that's going to cost me some money. And of course, the type 2 air says I'm a cheapskate. I'm not going to feed bicarb, and therefore I could have made some money had I fed it. Very sophisticated analysis occurs here, and this came from the University of Pennsylvania several years ago. That will cost you a nickel a day, pretty much the cost of the product. In some cases, it may be higher or lower, depending on the statistic analysis. And of course, if you did a type 2 air, that will cost you 30 cents a day. Now, as listeners, one of my questions, I went back to my colleague in Pennsylvania and said, well, what should that ratio be? And the answer is, well, it varies. And you have to decide what kind of risk you're going to take out there as well. More about that in another example. So that's a type 1, type 2. Ask for that information because it looks at all the published data with that feed additive that goes into these calculations, not just one study or one university. It shows that all the data that's out there, and usually it's journal referee type data. Here is a beautiful one from Canada. This is a meta-analysis done by Dr. Dunfield up in Canada. It's got some age on it now, but take a look at this. This is all the meta-analysis of all the work done, and you can see almost 10,000 cows on some 71 studies, and pretty much this is what you can expect on your farm, listed on the right side. Now, the tag, the FDA clearance is feed efficiency, so that's what it's tagged for there, and you can see it can have some impacts both on milk yield, dry matter intake, and of course it does change fatty acid composition because this product changes rumen volatile fatty acid production and therefore influences some of the milk components as well. So let's start wrapping up this phase of the webinar, and that is all of you online, and we got a big crowd. Wow, you all have this on your desktop or on your feed sheet, and that is which feed additives are you going to use? And if you get the feeding guide booklet from Hort's Dairyman, there's a nice section in there that takes it through in more depth. All I'm going to do is give you the Hutjens bias, and here we go. For lactating cows, here is my list. And that's why I ask you to print this off, because I'm not going to walk you through all this. To me, you can order them. That's another topic for another day. But in blue, notice on the bottom is called mycotoxin binders. And notice the word says maybe behind it. A number of nutritionists and consultants are saying, Mike, I think we have enough risk on dairy farms with wet byproduct feeds coming in, wet silages, poor fermentation, damages on silages, that the mycotoxins just can be there. And of course, you see some national survey data that comes from one of the manufacturers, and that it's in this last year, it's pretty prevalent, one or more mycotoxins in much of our feed ingredients as far as that goes. If I were your consultant, then I would challenge you to put these all in, excluding the mycotoxin binder. In Illinois, you can get that done for around 30 to 35 cents per cow per day if you put the other 6 in that are listed there. The next PowerPoint takes a look at close-up dry cows, and again, you can see it changes a bit. Here, notice I've got 2 new blue ones added from when this talk was put together about a year ago for a conference. I've added chromium. I think the organic chromium has enough data and support that has some real neat interactions, primarily coming through insulin and dry matter intake. Pretty impressive, guys and gals out there. Take a look at it. And then anionic products, I simply put that on my list. It used to be on the maybe list or as needed list. I think in my dry cow close-up programs, I'm going to put an anionic product in my dry cow program and adjust the calcium levels to reflect that product and the research behind that product. We then look at fresh cow groups, and notice the list again changes a little bit. It looks more like the lactating cow ration here. Again, you can see a chromium pops up there. We've added rumen-protected choline. Excuse me, I said chromium. I should say chromium is there again. Rumen-protected choline is added. And just to call attention to it, I just hear lots of good comments on calcium supplementation, either using the bolus or a drench type program. Yes, there is some new data coming out of the state of New York that says wait 24 hours, see if the cow responds. And if she doesn't respond, then you better help her out. And so I'll let you work through that data there. I just would go ahead and add my calcium, especially to my 2nd, 3rd, 4th lactation cows, and especially that difficult calving or retained placenta, any challenges that may affect that cow as well. Be well aware, this is the Hutjens list. It doesn't have to be your list. You may expound on that and be ready to go with it as well. I also have my watch list. If you would have looked at this presentation a year ago, you would have seen some other products there. They moved off to other lists. The essential oils, primarily from our European colleagues, have a direct effect. In fact, some of you saw in a recent publication, oregano having an effect that mimics monensin. And so I realize Europe, you cannot feed monensin except boluses in transition cows. But certainly that was one to keep watching. There are some products now in the United States that does feature essential oils, direct-fed microbial products or probiotics, if you wish. Again, we're watching them very carefully. Some of these now have some really good data behind them. Ask for the research here. There's a lot of different microbes that could be used in a product. And then the feed enzymes. So those I find most appealing are going to be the fiber-digesting bacteria, the enzymes that break down fiber, especially NDF. Amylase, generally speaking, pretty important in chicken and pigs. In fact, you can buy a seed corn now that has that enzyme associated with it, but our cows can usually do a pretty good job of amylase if you get it available for the cow. So there we go. We are done. And Jim, we are 1 minute late, so we have to go a little bit faster. And let's go now to the focus, and that's on B vitamins. Very challenging. And struggle a little bit to be sure that we don't create any high expectations or avoiding that. I would love to see the new NRC, what they're going to do with B vitamins. Everyone is watching for that, but it looks like it may be still a year away as far as that goes. So, Jim, let's open up the first polling question. Abby, if you got your ears on, I will actually let you read the first polling question if you're there. If you don't jump in, then I will read it as well.
I can do that. So first question here, want everyone to take a look at it and pick the best answer. Why would you consider adding B vitamins? So select one of the following options. Improve health in transition cows. Rumen bacterial production is insufficient. The B vitamin requirements are higher for your herd. Increase milk production or reduce stress. So why would you consider adding a B vitamin to your ration? We'll let everyone answer those. We've got we've got a huge audience on today, and they're answering really quickly, Mike. So I think they're excited to hear what you're going to have to say about this.
Yeah, we got 2/3 to vote in, Jim. We have the majority. So let's go ahead and close that and share it. Actually, all 5 of the answers are quite good. It's interesting. Almost over half people say improve health and transition cows. Bingo, that's a very good one as far as that goes. 18% said bacteria don't produce is insufficient. You are correct at certain stage of the lactation curve. You'll see that here in just a few minutes. Another small group said 7% said B vitamins are actually higher than what the requirements that are listed at this point. We have increased milk production, simply saying we get more milk. We may need to get more B vitamins in there. There is some data that I refer to that a bit later. And then, of course, reducing stress, and that always fits well. Very interesting. So I guess we'd give everybody an A for responding. And Jim, I have to click, is that right? Or do something here, and we're off and running. Well, this is not going to be a biochemical class, but I think it's really a neat PowerPoint that came from, as you can see, the references down there. What do B vitamins do? They are essential nutrients for dairy cattle, primarily through enzymes, metabolism. And look at that, protein, carbohydrate, if we go across the top, de novo fat synthesis, we come down to the urea cycle, gluconeogenesis, and then methane production. Look at that, guys and gals. There's all the B vitamins where they could play a role in the metabolism of dairy cattle. Pretty impressive as far as that goes. And if you are a student at the University of Wisconsin, you get to memorize all those names and all those cycles. I think, Abby, I may have forgotten those, but I think this is a very important PowerPoint to say, where do they fit in? And you can study this a bit later to see where does B6, B12, and B3. B3 is niacin, if that helps you out a little bit, all of these different enzymes. One that caught my eye, again, that comes from a couple different sources, is the need for B vitamins for liver glucose synthesis. Why is glucose synthesis in the liver so important? Because it takes propionic acid from the rumen, and of course, that's where your monins and your essential oils come into play, that it therefore becomes a precursor for glucose. And why is glucose important? And if you look over on the left-hand side of the slide, just think about this. That a cow is, and a lot of cows now in Europe and the United States, around the world, produce 40 kilos of milk a day. Think about that. 3 kilograms of glucose is needed every day. And unlike you and I or other monogastric animals, I eat sugar and I can increase my blood glucose. But dairy cows convert that over to VFAs as far as that goes. Second of all, it has a role in fertility, as you can see, in terms of oocytes, and finally the immune system. And this comes out of Jesse Goff's lab and others as well, that immune cells really need glucose as an energy source, maybe as much as, look at that, guys and gals, 2 kilos a day. So that's why now immunity and animal health becomes so very, very important. This will answer one of the questions that came in from our listeners ahead of time. Patty, thank you for sending those to me. And that is, take a look at this slide, and you can see that it changes. When you're in the green, it says probably in the lactation period and the transition period, there could be sufficient amounts of those B vitamins there. And you can see niacin ends up being a double green here, but you don't see some that are not sufficient. They stay kind of in the off shade, reddish color, whatever it is. And so I think our take-home message to my listeners is that a lactation period and transition period may vary on B vitamin requirements, and that is by B vitamins specifically. These are all expressed in terms of gram levels, except for choline, of course, and you can see that at your leisure. Again, another reason I have printed this off so you can study this a bit later. Now, here comes the other one. That's the other shoe that hits the floor, and that is, well, what do the rumen bacteria do to supplemental B vitamins? The answer is it kicks the crap out of them. You can see riboflavin just basically totally destroyed. And you can let all these B vitamins, very significant destruction levels. So about the only sources your cows in most cases are going to get is going to come from bacterial microbial synthesis as far as that goes. You can see Biotin has got the best number at 60%. So your options are either to inject it, and we do that once in a while in baby calves, especially calves that are being stressed out as far as that goes, the type of disease. And then, of course, looking at some type of a rumen-protected product. So, in fact, we deliver the actual milligrams of product to that dairy animal. We talk about protecting B vitamins, eyes wide open. We have different companies. You could put names to this. We will not do that today. Some companies are doing what I call encapsulation. I'm not sure that's the right term, but it simply means that we basically wrap up the B vitamins with a product that's been approved by FDA that has not allowed the B vitamin to be available at rumen pH, typically around 6. But when you get in the lower gut at lower rumen pHs, it releases the coating, dissolves, releases that B vitamin, and now can be absorbed. That's encapsulation. Probably a little more expensive than embedding. Embedding simply, in my view, is that in most cases, this is a lipid material. Most lipids are rumen inert, so therefore, if the B vitamin is inside or tied in with the lipid material, then it is released in the lower gut. When lipases break down those fat products to fatty acids, release the B vitamins there to be absorbed in the lower gut. Embedding can be totally. I was in one place in which one company embeds it totally inside like a peanut M&M. In other cases, it's mixed with the fat. Therefore, some of it is exposed slightly to the outside of the rumen. More about that in just a minute. So, Abby, here's our last question for the day. I'm kind of curious. What are my listeners actually doing out there on their farms with their clients or with their companies or their co-ops?
Very good. All right, everybody, get ready to answer once again. Which B vitamins are you recommending or using on your dairy farm? So you can select as many as you want from this list. There's niacin, biotin, rumen-protected choline, or no B vitamins are added to the ration right now. So please make your selections. If you're using more than one, go ahead and click on a couple of the answers. We've got people quickly voting, so we know that we've got some active dairy farmers or nutritionists out in the audience. So that's great to see. And we're about 70% voted, Mike. So I think.
Yep, I think it looks good, Jim. So let's go ahead and close the polls and let's share it with our colleagues here. And really interesting. Now, I have to write these numbers down because otherwise I'll never remember them, because this is a really nice survey because we have a huge crowd here today. And so I'm writing those down. And what's interesting, you see Biotin is a leader at 62%. I guess, Jim, I'd look at this and it looks like at least 34%, I'm just assuming, feed all three of them. We have no way to sort that out at this stage of the game. Another 14% is we don't use the product, and that may be a correct answer on certain farms. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes, because we're going to go through all three of these vitamins, B vitamins. So you can see biotin, 62%. Jim, I guess they can see this, can't they? So I don't have to read it to you. You can kind of see a very interesting information. And so we are going to be off and running. So here we go. Let's say, and we're going to go through 4 case studies or 4 different combinations we can look at in this go at this point, and we'll see where we go. So now let's start out with biotin. This is one that was on my list, and interesting to me, it was the highest one that was selected. So what can biotin do for us? Well, this has been around for a while, and it was really featured a great deal for hoof health. And you can see this data, and you're going to see that data. I'm not going to read it to you. You can read that at your leisure in just a few minutes here, or when you download the PowerPoints there. But what really caught my attention has been some new recent research that says increased milk yield. And that's powerful because farmers are going to say, show me the money. Show me the money. So the level is 15 to 20 milligrams per cow per day. If you're going to get hoof health improvement, most researchers say 6 months to a year you should be feeding before you try to evaluate it or have your hoof trimmer evaluated, or however you're going to determine if it's going there. The current cost is fairly economical, 3 to 8 cents, depending if China is in the market or not. Benefit to cost ratio is 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, depending on how you look at current milk prices. And that you may ask that question when I look at Show Me the Money, that was a $17 milk. And of course, that becomes a big factor on benefit to cost ratio as well. Here is one of the first studies that came out from The Ohio State University, from their veterinary college, in which they did a early lactation study. You can see feeding the biotin prepartum and 100 days postpartum, and they did it for 100 days. So that takes the hoof health pretty much out of the question. So it was not a hoof health, but you can see here that they got the control cows 81 pounds of milk, 10 milligrams, 83 pounds of milk, 20 milligrams, 87 pounds of milk. That's a lot of milk when you take a look at that. The question that perhaps comes across my listeners here today saying, well, if 20 was good, what about 40 or 60 or put a shovelful in there. Well, the Wisconsin researchers did that study. That is kind of interesting. It does two things, actually. Eyes wide open. There is a control diet. I didn't show that there because obviously the only difference is no B vitamins are fed. So remember, B stands for the biotin, 20 milligrams per cow per day. They also then fed, notice the word fed, the same 20 milligrams of biotin along with those levels of other B vitamins supplemented in the feeding program. And then, of course, they said, well, if 1X is good, what happens if you go to 2X? And here comes my 40 milligrams of biotin, and you can read the rest of the numbers at your leisure. And lo and behold, here is the research results. And you can see that if you look at control versus biotin, you can see that in terms of dry matter, we did see a nice increase, about 1.5 pounds of dry matter, but the cows figured it out, and you can see roughly about 4 pounds more milk. We didn't get any additional kick when we added the B vitamins as a feed source there. We went to the 2X level. Lo and behold, you can see dry matter went down. And you know what happens when dry matter goes down? Milk production goes down as well. Notice the dry matter, however, went down greater than the controls, or very parallel to the control animals as well, at least numerically as well. So be careful with biotin, because it appears if you feed too much of it, this data would suggest we could have a problem. This goes another question that Patty had sent into us, and that is, what about the diet? And you can see the reference there. Most of this data is older data, but you can see a high forage data would synthesize more biotin from microbial synthesis in the cow. And this was an in vitro study, so that also should be taken into mind, but a very easy one to control. But you can see as you feed more grain, you tend to get less B vitamins being synthesized. Again, something to think about in early lactation, high producing cows. Here is another two studies, two charts, PowerPoints that are coming. This is European data that was presented at a Canadian conference here several years ago. I'm not going to walk you through this. This simply shows you what type of lesion they looked at, the response, and the dose. One case, it was a beef cow study. So you take a look at that at your leisure. You can see at that time, biotin was still being looked at as a foot or hoof factor as well. Here is another two studies. Most of these are either Canadian or European data. And so the author was willing to share those PowerPoints with me. Look at those at your leisure. Pretty nice responses, actually, as we go along as well. So now the question comes up, well, that was raw diet and biotin. What about rumen-protected? And another company shared some data with me that comes from a very large field study that's going to be presented hopefully at this June at ADSA in Florida. And you can see 2,000 cows, field studies here, primarily U.S. Canadian cows. You can read the rest of those things, no major stressors here, but you can see good production. With the unprotected biotin, no control cows here, by the way, about 85 pounds of milk. You can see with the protected B vitamins included the biotin, a nice increase there of about 3 pounds of milk. Now, this was a blended product. You can see it on the bottom. The only number I can go back to the abstract, it was listed there, is that the unprotected was 20 milligrams and the rumen-protected was 10 milligrams. So those are the only two numbers. The other ones, of course, are at the company's point there. You can see that we also got a statistical improvement in milk yield, fat concentration, protein as well. And of course, when you put them both together, then even slightly higher significance when you put these together as well. So I think that answers that question, that if you can get the rumen-protected at an economical price, I guess I'd go that direction. So that completes our discussion on biotin. You're always welcome to send in questions that we will allude to here a bit later. Let's switch gears then and take a look at niacin, another B vitamin. I believe that's B3 if my memory is correct. And let's take a look at what niacin has to say for me. Now, eyes wide open. This was a nice study put together by Schwab and Shaver at the University of Wisconsin, published in the Professional Animal Science Journal. And this is not protected niacin. You can see the timeline, 27 different studies, and this is the meta-analysis. Remember, we talked about that earlier. So they discovered very quickly that 6 grams was not effective, 12 grams were. And now you can see the response in terms of milk yield and the statistical significance, 0.06, 0.01 on fat. And you can look at the range. You can see a big range in production responses in these studies here. The one that probably catches your eye and mine is that half the studies had enough milk to cover the cost at 1 cent per day. So that'd be 12 cents in this, and says about half the study says you'll get your money back, And there's a few studies that said you'd actually make some money. So that's kind of interesting as well. Again, a question came in and we decided I would put it in here because it is a perfect timing from our colleague in Belarus, and says, oh, any solid research comparing coated niacin to regular niacin, and how much should the coated niacin be fed? And the answer is yes, there is data out there. This was presented at ADSA, I think 2 years ago, if I'm correct. You can come in. I know the person who did this study is online. You can tell me the date of that if you wish. But they fed both 3.5 and 7 grams of rumen-protected niacin, abbreviated RPN, for those of you that are watching there. This was a large California field study with nearly 700 cows. They started feeding this 15 days prepartum to 100 days postpartum, so pretty much through the transition period. There was an increase in dry matter intake in the fresh cow pen, and that's big news. 4 pounds of dry matter, I'll take that every day to the bank because it should impact, and it did impact ketosis risk in those cows. The downside was I didn't get any more milk out of this. So it was all cow health, cow immunity, and hopefully maybe fertility down the road a bit later here. No effects on milk yield components. And of course, the fertility was measured with the small number of field studies here. The higher levels, which was 7 grams, if my memory is correct, was not effective as far as that goes. So here we go. This is what you want to know. So it looks like 3 grams of rumen-protected niacin would get the job done. Now, this was a fat embedded product. So 65 to 70% of the rumen niacin is protected. The other 30-35% is not. Now, why do I mention that? Because there was some neat research from Purdue and Wisconsin that said niacin can stimulate rumen microbial activity in the rumen. So you will see a bit later, maybe not today, but if you're going to feed a totally rumen-protected product, I might add 2 or 3 grams of unprotected. In fact, just to be sure I got my rumen bacteria requirements met at that point. The price at that time was 3 cents per gram. So you can see if we're feeding 3 grams, we're going to be somewhere around that 10-cent number, and away we go. Another product, this, now be careful, this is encapsulated. So this is a different company with a different product, and they were using it for heat stress. And there's good news here. The heat stress product reduced blood, and heat stress, their data would suggest control cows had reduced levels of niacin due to heat stress. And of course, niacin is a vasodilation product, which increases blood flow to the exterior of the animal. That's why we get less milk, we get less efficiency in the rumen, and why sometimes we have smaller calves born under heat stress is because we're getting reduced flow to the other key organs. The niacin did increase water intake, sweating rates, and decrease body temperature. In their studies, about 12 grams of their product was kind of the sweet spot there. So again, depending on how you're positioning the product will make a difference on the amount that you're going to feed. Let's go to our next B vitamin, which is going to be choline. And actually, Jim, we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule, so we're doing well. We motor right along here. Usually it's faster here than at home. Let's talk about rumen-protected choline. That's all we're going to talk about. Excuse me, is rumen-protected choline. This is your first meta-analysis that was put together by Dr. Rick Grummer. Notice the date, 2012. We have some more data to add to that. 13 different studies, and you can see that the average response was roughly 5 pounds of milk, which is about 2.2 kilos, give or take, and that is highly significant. And there sits the data. You can see that we did get an increase of about 1.5 pounds of dry matter. So that would cost me right now about 16 cents in Illinois. We got we got that 5 pound milk response, depending if you're going to use $20 milk, $17 milk, or $15 milk, makes a difference there. Energy corrected milk, you can see a nice response there actually. So our components are looking good. And protein responses, and there you can kind of see where we're at. So that was a study that a lot of us used. Now here's some newer data. Notice this is a, again, transition period, 3 weeks prepartum, 3 weeks postpartum on this product. And you can see again, in the green, those are kilograms. Careful, kilograms. So us US guys, that's not pounds, that's kilograms. So we saw about a 2.1 kilogram, all these studies, and there you can see there is 3 or 4 studies that have come out since the Grummer meta-analysis as far as that goes as well. So I do not have an updated meta-analysis here, but you can kind of see where that data was. And again, you can see the stars. That's why you want to look at this data at your leisure. You can see about half the studies had a significant effect. You can see at the 0.1 level. I would get you a piece of pie that the bottom 2 or 3 would be even significant at 0.05 level, but that was not reported at that time. Now, here is some other things to look at. Think about this, guys and gals. You can see the positive effects of rumen-protected choline. By the way, a fairly pricey additive, typically in that range of about 30 cents US per cow per day. But the good news, you can see while the increase in milk yield really didn't start happening until towards the end of the transition period, but it just kept going. And so I think in my mind, and maybe the company would argue with me, but that's okay. It's my webinar. I would think that you can see once we get these cows on a higher trajectory, a higher curve, look at this, guys and gals. It stays right there. So even though we stop feeding at 3 weeks after calving, you can see throughout the lactation, we can see that nice response there as well on these cows. So think about that, the timeline, and does your facility allow you to do that? They also did some measurements. This is some Florida data. You can see it down in the lower right-hand corner. This data came from the University of Florida. And you can see, well, there was no effect on colostrum yield. Both the control and the choline-protected cows had good levels of colostrum here, typically in almost 20-pound range. If you look at the score, the amount of the bricks on it, both are good quality colostrum, but you can see a significant improvement in the brick score and the choline supplemented cows there. And then, of course, what about what the calves do? And based on blood data, the apparent efficiency of IgG absorption, you can see a significant 0.01 improvement of the IgGs there that are in that due to the choline supplementation to the transition cow. Now, this is a fun one to look at, also coming from the University of Florida, and I have not seen it published yet, but you can see that when we look at the female calves in the uterus of those cows getting choline, 2 years later, there was an effect. And so some of this is really fascinating. We see some of this with our milk replacer and calf starters that we can imprint, for lack of a better word, epigenetics. It's interesting, but wow, that is pretty neat stuff. And another reason why you might want to consider supplementing that in the transition period. And you'll notice that we had that on our list. It was not a new addition we at this point here. So that takes care of choline. Just to give you a quick flavor, go back, look at the data, make your decisions. Remember, you buy the products or you make the recommendations. I don't. Now, the last part of our webinar here, we'll look at some what I call blended B vitamins. And so they can look at different combinations. Remember, these are all rumen-protected. So again, this is some pretty neat data. You'll see this one is also going to come out in ADSA in 2020. This abstract has been accepted. Therefore, I could get my hands on the abstract at this point. This is a monster study, but again, it's an on-farm study. So this is not done at the University of Illinois or Cornell or Guelph, but 65 studies, 65 different farms with 10,000 cows. And you can see that most of this was North American. Canada and U.S. made up 70% of it, but there are some herds from Mexico, Latin America, Australia, and Spain in here as well. And you can see that we see a nice increase in milk yield, about 2 pounds per day out here. And you can see, again, an increase in fat yield and protein yield that helps pay the piper as far as that goes on these blended products. You can see some ranges there. That's 2 standard deviations, a 95% confidence interval. It says that if you look at the lower end, you're going to get about a 0.6 kilogram increase on the high end of that bell-shaped curve, nearly 2.1 kilograms more milk. So again, pretty interesting. Now on the bottom in red, you can see the products that are listed there. And again, this is company data, so I have no idea what those levels are going to be that they were rumen-protecting in their product line as well. Another paper came out and shows the forest plot A forest plot simply is a graphical representation of the meta-analysis. So now you can see there are 65 herds on this, and you'll see that if the real power are those herds that do not cross the null line, which is 0. So you can see a number of the studies on these farms means that that is statistically there. Number 2, the bigger the circle or the sign, that means a stronger study, which either meant a lot of cows or less variation. So again, powerful, powerful, powerful. And again, there sits that same data we shared with you just a bit earlier. You can take a look at that. And again, this is going to be presented at ADSA this year. Now, why eyes wide open? Remember that last study? That was with the very large herd. This study has a different product. This is more of a transition type product. So you can see folic acid, B12, riboflavin, and choline in here. How much choline? I don't know. But the point is, it's a different product. Just remember that. And now you can take a look, and there's a whole bunch of data, but Jim and I decided, for the sake of time, we will just show 3 parts of the study. They also, if you're really interested, you can get the dry matter intakes from us or from the company. But you can see prepartum, you can see a trend for increase in dry matter intake, not statistical. You can see again in the end of the transition period, a slightly higher increase, and then right at the end of transition period, even more. So certainly this shows that improvement in dry matter intake, and some of you that voted for stress, this could really come into play very nicely. Again, you see the references on the bottom for those of you who want to go back and look at that. Here we go again. Now, be careful. This is a different product. This one has the biotin, doesn't have the choline in it here. This looks at a different author from the University of California, Davis. And you can see here there's an improvement in feed efficiency. So simply meaning that we're getting more, and that is statistically significant out here as well. And you can see effects that it has on milk fat, milk protein, milk production, dry matter intake. All the data is there. You can study that again. You U.S. Colleagues, remember these are kilograms, not pounds. So don't fall into that trap as well. And you can read some of those changes down in the right-hand corner at your leisure as well. What about reproduction? Again, this is another key University of California study, a different paper here. Again, you can see the composition of the product here. You're looking at percent of pregnant cows at first service. And again, you can see a statistical improvement here occurring on these cows as well when you look at these various timelines here, especially in the first 42 days after AI occurring on these animals. Some of you are going to ask about cost of the blends. So here you go. This also comes out of a paper, and it shows updated for March 2020 milk prices. So butterfat was $1.98 a pound, protein $3.03 a pound, other solids 18 cents. Ended up being $17.50 milk. Other percent of the solids, you can see them listed there at your leisure. Now remember that confidence interval. So basically, if you look at the average response, in this study here on that meta-analysis, that would be those 65 herds, and my memory is correct, 2 pounds of milk. You can see that the cost of this product was 12 cents per cow per day. That'll help some of you out there to kind of get a feel of what this blended product from this one company is. There are several companies, I'm sure, in Europe and in the U.S. that produce this as well. And so you can see the average cow, you can see the rate of return would be 41 cents, and the ROA, return on investment, 3 to 1. If you look at the low end of response, then it's 2 to 1. So again, now you've seen the economic impact there as well. And so here we go. Hutjens recommendations. We're done. We're right at 12:45. And here we go. A biotin, you know, we are recommending 20 milligrams unprotected or 10 grams Rumen-protected, based on that study we showed there a bit earlier. You have to take a look at costs of those two. I know I would probably go the Rumen-protected route if I were going to do it. On the niacin, I think the best response you're going to see on niacin are going to be heavier cows based on some early research here. I'm calling heavier cows, and some of you are going to shriek at me, squeal at me, or grumble at me, 3.25. So my cows are a little on the heavier side. And again, with some of the strategies coming on with farmers having to dump milk or reduce milk yield, one way is to dry cows up early. We might unfortunately see more heavier cows here. And if I was going to do that, then I'd be feeding 3 grams raw, 3 grams of Rumen-protected. And one company, another company, I would feed just the 3 grams of their product because there would be enough raw available for the rumen microbes. Choline. I am now recommending choline. I'm not recommending niacin across the board. As an as-needed basis. Choline, 15 grams of Rumen-protected choline. Therefore, the coating product adds to that amount there in terms of grams per cow per day of the final product. And perhaps the one that was probably most challenging for me to sort through in the last couple of weeks is what do I do with the B vitamin blends? And basically, I am not recommending them across the board, to be honest with you. But I think as attendees, you got to evaluate, look at the research, look at on-farm responses if you try it at 12 or 14 cents per cow per day, and then be aware of the vitamin B profile because companies will change the profile. And again, I do not know how many milligrams are in these products here. The company may elect to share that with you, but I have no benchmark to know what those numbers should be. You can see the numbers that Randy Shaver had in his paper when they were feeding it. And of course, we saw no response, and we saw that a bit earlier. So with that, I think we are now ready to turn the program back to Abby. And Abby, why don't you go ahead and start closing and before we go to questions.
Yes, thank you, Mike. As always, you cover a tremendous amount of ground in a short period of time. And thank you for putting together a presentation that contains so much information and hopefully will be useful to our listeners as they think about those feed additives and especially which B vitamins should be incorporated into the diet. So thank you for sharing your recommendations on that. Also, I want to thank Provimi for their sponsorship of this webinar. We certainly appreciate their support of this program and their assistance in helping us provide this educational opportunity. So thank you again, Provimi, for that webinar sponsorship. If we move on to the next slide, there we go. You can see our upcoming webinars. And in May, on the 11th, we will be having a presentation by Paul Fricke, who comes to us from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and he'll be talking about a reproduction research update. Some of the things he'll be highlighting in that webinar include the current limitations to fertility and strategies for utilizing sex semen, beef semen, in vitro fertilization, and embryo transfer work on the farm. So please join us if you have an interest in reproductive management on dairy farms. Then in June, with June Dairy Month, we have a slightly different presentation, and this is a new speaker to us. His name is Bruce German from the University of California, Davis, and he will be talking to us about milk's role in human immunity. So we all know that milk is a nutritious food, one of the most nearly perfect foods that are available for humans, but there's more and more to milk that maybe we don't even know or understand, and some different values that can provide to the human consumer. So he's going to talk about some of the work that he's done in that area, studying milk's role in human immunity. And then a special presentation that we have coming up this week is our dairy live stream program. And amid all that's going on in the dairy industry and in the world in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, we wanted to put together some educational materials that can help dairy producers and people supporting those dairy farmers understand what's going on with the markets and in particular milk pricing and the supply chain. So this Wednesday at 11 o'clock Central Time, and April 15th is that date, we will have our first dairy live stream program. And our speakers are a trio of experts in the area of dairy economics. We have Mark Stevenson from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and then Annie Novakovic and Christopher Wolf from Cornell University. And the three of them will be talking about economics on the dairy farm side, what's going on in milk processing, and then comments about the milk markets, kind of what we're seeing with the milk prices now and what we can expect moving forward. That webinar will be moderated by our managing editor, Corey Geiger. And again, it'll be short presentations by our three expert speakers, and then an opportunity for audience members to ask questions by typing them into the chat function, just like you can on our regular monthly webinars. So if you want to participate in the dairy live stream webinars, please register at the website that appears on the screen. You can also find more information on our hordes.com website. And we want to let you know that the first session will be this Wednesday, and then we are planning sessions for the next 2 Wednesdays that follow, April 22nd and then April 29th, all at 11 o'clock Standard Time, Central Time. And depending on how the situation unfolds in the next couple of weeks, we are preliminary planning to have some of these same live stream webinars going into May as well. So please, once again, if you want to participate, register at that web link on the screen and make plans to attend this webinar on Wednesday. So I think, Mike, we had a lot of questions that came in on the chat. So if you want to go through them and answer any that you haven't already addressed, I think now would be a great time to do that.
Very good, Abby. We will do that, and it's going to be kind of the lightning round, so we'll see if Jim can keep up with me as far as that goes. And here we go. First question: chromium values can be look good in terms of return on investment. Many nutritionists still question its incorporation of lactating rations. I need your view on its incorporation. A very simple answer for me. And remember, all these answers are Hutjens biased. I would be looking at putting it into my transition diets, my close-up and my fresh cows and my early lactation cows, because the role appears to be coming through insulin and glucose utilization, and that's the pressure point. So if I had that, good for me. A problem I have in Illinois, and that is when my fresh cows get it, everybody gets it. And that's a problem. Some of our more smaller herd sizes, when I have a one group TMR and my fresh cow gets that same group as does all the other cows. Another question: any benefits using Rumen and bolus versus in the ration and close-up ration? In the close-up ration, boy, if I had that choice, no brainer here in the U.S., I'd go with boluses, but it's not been cleared by FDA. So I do not have that choice in the United States. Why do I like the bolus? Well, it's like almost like an IV drip in some respect. It's going to meter out about 300, 330 milligrams on a 24/7 basis as far as that goes. If you read the package carefully, it is one or the other. In other words, I bolus my cow in the dry period, and I think it runs for about 120 days. It would mean that it would carry over into my fresh cow protocol and early lactation cow protocol, and just legally, that's where we're at. Another question is your thoughts on feeding a calcium binder to close-up cows. I would not do it. Now, we can argue all about that. I know there's a number of companies in the U.S. that are doing that with the zeolite type product, but I would not do that. I think we need more research to find out what else are we tying up along with calcium and magnesium, potentially phosphorus, other B vitamins. Second of all, the cost is about 3 to 4 times the price of their traditional DCAT products out there as well. And I just have a lot of questions. It's interesting. Some of the early work from Cornell looked positive as far as that goes. Vitamin B products and rumen, why additive? Not sure I understand that question, Jim. Maybe they can clarify that as far as that goes. What value does one see in biotin in mid and late lactation cows? I don't have data to answer that question, to be very honest with you, but I'm going to be coming through the point that if it's going to stimulate dry matter intake in those cows, then I take it for the whole lactation. I really would. I'm a big fan of dry matter intake if I got good cows, and that's kind of where it's at. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you want to pull it out of your low group TMR, you can do that. I would not argue with you on that, because generally low group TMR, dry matter intake is not the problem. If there is a problem, they might eat too much dry matter, and that's another story for another day. Does niacin work like betaine and heat stress? Don't know that answer. I have not seen data on betaine. Betaine is another one of those methyl donors, and a question came up, well, methionine is a methyl donor as well, and Jim, we're going to take care of that one right now as well, and the answer is what I would do with methionine, I would certainly meet the methionine amino acid requirement in my cow, and then after that, I would then decide to come in with my choline to make sure I keep a healthy liver at this point. I'm not sure some of my Illinois and Wisconsin colleagues will agree with that. There has been some head-to-head methionine choline comparisons. I think if I saw their abstracts correctly, it looked like their abstracts favored the choline. They are both methyl donors, much like the betaine product would be as well. With what you have shown with the positives with biotin, would you consider it more of a nutrient versus a feed additive? Where do you draw the line? That person should get another cup of coffee as far as that goes. You are exactly right. A vitamin is a nutrient. Vitamins are a nutrient. So all the B vitamins are a nutrient, but we put them in the category. We also put zinc methionine as an additive, and yeah, zinc and methionine are nutrients as well. And so I guess it's a Hutjens line. And so you win, I lose. You're right, it is a nutrient. Usually I look at my additives basically at their cost and the amount of inclusion. So usually if I had to try to get out underneath that question there, that's where I would go. Okay, I have not read this one very much, so I have to read it live here. A quick question for Mike at the end of the webinar. Would you choose Rumen-protected methionine or Rumen-protected choline as a supplement in dry cow program, considering herds with no fat cows at dry off? Wow. Which dose and goals would you suggest? Thank you very much, Mike and Jim, Abby and Patty. And the answer is, I don't know. I would certainly check Rumen-protected methionine. Methionine has so many other things besides amino acid. It has some methyl donor with it. It can impact a milk fat synthesis. It has some immune function. Dr. Cardoza at Illinois has shown some work on reproduction. So to me, I'm going to put the methionine in. Rumen-protected carbohydrates, I assume that is glucose. I've not seen data on that. I haven't seen a product on the marketplace either. So maybe I'm just behind the ball. Ignorance is always bliss as far as that goes. Is a dose of choline 15 grams per cow per day? It is actually 15 grams of actual choline. And in many cases, that product may end up being 50 to 60 to 75 grams of product with the encapsulation and coating process. You want to deliver 15 grams of choline to the cow as far as that goes. And that's kind of the sweet spot. I had a study was sent to me showing different levels of effects on liver lipid. And that was kind of the sweet spot, 12 to 15 grams of it as far as that goes. I think, Jim, we answered the one on methyl donor at this point. It says, which one would I pick? We've answered that one there. A normal rumen should produce all the B vitamins they need, isn't it? And the answer is, another PowerPoint that I had access to, the answer is no. If you look at low producing cows that don't have a lot of dry matter intake, there is a maintenance requirement of B vitamins. And it was interesting to me that the lower producing cows had some need for, in this case, it was using folic acid as the marker. And so the question is, wow, I think got to be careful on if the rumen microbes during the transition period, changing to more grain, different dry matter intakes, different rumen deficiencies. I don't know. So maybe that's the best answer we have there. Question, you got it right, 20 milligrams of biotin unprotected, 10 grams protected based on that one company's research that we looked at here. What about injecting vitamins? Yes, you can inject B vitamins. You can inject vitamin A, D, and E. You can inject selenium. You can inject copper, zinc. There are products out there. One nice thing about injecting, unless you miss the cow, you got her in this, it's in the system to be absorbed. And so the question is the cost, the restriction of it. And if you can get my B vitamins at 12 cents a day, I think a B vitamin shot, I'd be careful on this. I've not looked at it recently. They may be effective for several weeks. And so that'd be your question. Can I inject so many mils of a B shot complex into my calf or into my cow or my dry cow versus feeding it to my cow at the various costs? So to me, it's an economic question, but I just think, who is going to inject cows and tie them up with another shot? And that was one of the biggest arguments with BST. We're gaining here. We're good. No idea about B vitamins in zebu cattle. There is some work that Matt is doing here at the university here in Pan America, in Latin America with zebu crossed animals, but no idea on that. Another question, I can't answer it because it's not legal. What percent of the herds in the U.S. are feeding ionophores as yoni control measurements? I will not go down that slippery slope. It has not been approved for that function there. I hear anecdotal evidence on it. It kind of goes back to some of the drugs we're using now for the C. COVID-19 one. And so I'll just hang behind and say, behind FDA and say, I will only use it for its approved uses as far as that goes. From Iran, we have many products that are mixed supplements. Do you recommend us? Oops, we lost it. Oh, Jim just brought it back. Do you recommend us to evaluate B vitamin concentration in that product, or just trust the printer? Boy, folks in Iran, folks in the U.S., folks in Canada, you're on your own unless you got a specific company making the product, and they're going to tell you how many milligrams they are putting in and show you the data that they are seeing in responses. Now, how's that for ducking a question? So the answer is, I would trust the printed data if it has been published in a peer review choline, as far as that goes. Choline feeding only close up in fresh cows. Yes, that's exactly correct. When will you give us an update on folic acid and B12? There's no data showing increased production, immunity, reproductive performance, as well as synergy with choline, methionine. I'd like to hear more about folic and B12. So would I. So would I. So that's the easy question. I believe there's some folic acid in Canada that was published a couple of years ago, but wow, it made a difference in if it was first lactation or mature cows and timing, and so I just don't know much about it as far as that goes. That's why nothing was said about that. Choline is not easy to supplement to fresh cows, particularly in small, medium herds. You're exactly right. Does it worth to supplement choline only in the close-up cows? I would say yes. So I would, given the choice, I would definitely put it in into my close-up cows to help them out, because I'm trying to protect my liver as much as I could. If you don't have a fresh cow diet, then you're back to the Illinois situation, and you have to either bite the bullet and say, we're going to feed it all the way and go from there. Another question has to go with Zeolite from Canada. It's a great question. Concerned about smaller herd sizes there. I do know we're at a meeting in Canada 2 years ago, in which that meeting sponsored by a veterinary group, and the veterinary group is recommended across the board, and they are having good luck with it. And so there are people that are doing it, and certainly we may have some benefits on small herds. I just have some unanswered questions. The University of Wisconsin is supposed to have some of those answers this coming year, and that is because you're going to make, especially in some of those herds that may feed it for more than 21 days. In fact, one company I'm aware of that will or cut it down to 14 days. And then the Wisconsin researchers say, well, then you're going to miss some cows because they're going to calve early, and we go from there. Should you feed protected choline? Should you protect choline plus methionine during the transition period? Yes, I would. How much? I would feed the 15 grams of choline, and then I would feed the methionine based on the amino acid there. And most of my diets are there. Do you think choline balances is not as effective? I think they are effective, especially if they're going to deliver somewhere in that 40 to 50 grams of actual calcium in the bolus or boluses. Some cases you got to feed more than one bolus, and the source should be calcium chloride, calcium sulfate, calcium propionate, more biological sources of the anion there or product. Boy, Jim, you just keep popping up questions. We're going to cut this off here pretty quick. Okay, in a prepartum transition, do you think there's a difference in the amount of B vitamins synthesized in the between a ration of corn silage or hay? I don't know. A good question. Just don't know. Just don't know. Any data on lysine for dry cows, fatty acid metabolism versus carnitine? Dr. Jim Drakely did some work on carnitine years ago, and haven't seen much about that since then. So if you really want to follow up on carnitine, get a hold of Dr. Jim Drakely here at Illinois, and he can answer that question for you. With hoof health attributes to feeding biotin, would you feed it 365? And the answer is yes. If I think Mike hoof trimmer thinks he sees benefits with biotin, I feed it 365 because it takes almost 6 months to get blood levels kicked back up to where it may have a biological effect as far as that goes. A comment from just a comment. I'll pass it along because I just come in. Feeding the zeolite herds having poor colostrum quality and cows springing up springing up enough of colostrum. Take it for what it's worth. This comment that came in. And Jim, I think we're done. So we get to turn it back to Abby and see what she has to say as we wrap up. Abby, thanks very much.
Very good. Great job, Mike, getting through that. We had lots of questions that came in from the audience. So thank you all for being active participants. And Mike, thank you for doing that speed round and getting all those questions answered. So I know a couple of people have commented about registering for the dairy live stream program. And if you receive the Hordes Dairyman Intel newsletter, there's a registration link in there. But otherwise, try the link again and we'll make sure that everything is functioning properly. So Patty will look at that right now. So I want to once again point out our sponsor for today. That was Provimi. Thank you for supporting us in this webinar and helping us provide this information to our audience. Our upcoming webinars here, May 11th, we have a reproductive research update by Paul Fricke from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And that webinar is sponsored by Niacin. And then June 8th, we have Bruce German from the University of California, Davis, speaking to us about milk's role in human immunity. So, and then once more, just want to mention the Wednesday program that's coming up at 11 o'clock Central Time about the dairy markets, what's going on with the current dairy situation here with our economist team of Mark Stevenson, Annie Novakovic, and Christopher Wolf talking about economics on the dairy farm, the milk processing side, and what the milk markets are doing amid the pandemic that is going on right now. So we hope you find that information useful, and we want you to join in. Once again, we are always just happy to have such a great audience with us, and we're thankful that you take the time to be part of our group here to learn from these webinars, especially in times like these. The webinar format allows us to reach so many of you all across the world, and we're thankful for your participation. We hope that everyone can stay safe and healthy, and as we work together to move the dairy industry forward and kind of get over the worst of the pandemic here, and hopefully see brighter days ahead for everybody. So thank you for taking time to be part of this today. Again, take care of yourselves and stay healthy, and we'll look forward to having you join us for a future webinar. Until then, until next time, I'd like to say goodbye from all of us here at Hordes Dairyman and our team at the University of Illinois. Please take care.